My father always said that money was the only real measure of success, and on the day I left home for good, he made sure I understood exactly how little he thought I was worth. He didn't yell, he didn't plead, he just stood at the top of the marble staircase in our Boston mansion, looked me in the eye, and tossed a crisp $100 bill onto the floor. "That's all a disappointment like you deserves," he said, with that calm, cruel smirk I'd grown up fearing more than any shout. "You want to walk away from everything? Fine, walk." I was 22. I had just graduated with honors in energy engineering. Neither of my parents showed up to my graduation. No call, no message. I stood on that stage alone, clapping for myself, while other students' families cheered. Now, in the grand living room of the Morgan estate, where chandeliers sparkled above antique paintings and polished floors, I stood with a single suitcase and no one to say goodbye. "You could still change your mind," my stepmother Sylvia said lightly, sipping her midday wine. "Your father can speak to the board, smooth things over. You know, if you came to your senses." I looked at her. Really looked. Her lips were painted perfectly, her diamonds large and lifeless. She'd spent her whole life playing the part of the elegant wife, just like she expected me to play the part of the obedient daughter. But I wasn't doing that anymore. No, I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not. My father's face turned a deep shade of red, the one I'd learned to fear when I was younger. "Then you're no longer a Morgan," he snapped. "The trust fund, the name, the legacy, you're throwing it all away for what? A garage project?" I bent down, picked up the $100 bill, and quietly placed it in my wallet. "Keep the legacy," I said. "I'll build something of my own." He laughed, the kind of laugh that echoed through rooms and left bruises you couldn't see. "You? Build something? Without the Morgan name, you're nothing. You don't even have a car, Ava." He was right about that. The car was in his name, so was the apartment near campus. All gone now. But I still had something he'd never understand. A vision. A belief that I could take this degree, this $100, and make something that mattered. I didn't say another word. I walked out the front door with my suitcase and silence. The gates clanged shut behind me like a final verdict. Standing on the sidewalk, I looked down at the only thing left in my possession besides clothes and a laptop. $100. That was the day I stopped being a Morgan. And the day I started becoming Ava Monroe. The moment those iron gates closed behind me, I realized something I hadn't thought about in the heat of the argument. I had no car, no apartment, no backup plan. My whole life had been tied to my father's name, and I'd just walked away from all of it with one suitcase and $100 in my wallet. But for the first time, I also felt something else. Freedom. I walked 3 blocks to the nearest bus station, dragging my suitcase across uneven sidewalks. I sat on a bench, checked my bank account. Empty. Just like my future, according to my father. But I still had one thing. A dream. I bought a one-way ticket to San Francisco for $62. It left that night. I spent another $9 on a cheap sandwich and bottled water, leaving me with $29 and nowhere to go once I arrived. Still, as I sat in that bus terminal, surrounded by strangers and neon lights, I opened my notebook and wrote down 3 promises to myself. I will never use the Morgan name again. I will build something that matters, something they'll never see coming. When I return, it will be on my terms, or not at all. The bus ride took 3 days. I slept in short bursts, using my backpack as a pillow. Somewhere around Ohio, a little girl gave me half of her granola bar without saying a word. I remember thinking, kindness doesn't cost anything. Why was it always in such short supply in my house? By the time we reached San Francisco, I hadn't showered in 3 days. I stepped off that bus exhausted, broke, and completely alone. And yet, I was more alive than I'd ever been. San Francisco wasn't what I'd imagined. I thought I'd be inspired by the skyline, energized by the innovation in the air. Instead, I was overwhelmed. The city was fast, loud, and impossibly expensive. I didn't know a soul. The hostels were full. The cheapest hotel was $75 a night, more than double what I had left. So, I spent my first night in a park near Mission Street. I curled up on a bench, my laptop bag as a pillow, my jacket barely enough to keep out the wind, Every sound, sirens, footsteps, distant arguments, kept me awake. By morning, I hadn't slept at all. But I was still breathing, still standing. I walked around until I found a small coffee shop tucked between two apartment buildings. It looked old, local, maybe even forgotten by time. Inside, it smelled like burnt espresso and warm pastries. I ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a small black coffee, and sat in the corner, trying to make it last while I used the free Wi-Fi. The barista noticed. She must have seen my tired eyes, the same clothes from the day before. She walked over and leaned on the counter. "You trying to stretch that coffee till sunset?" I looked up, startled. She smiled. "I'm Rosa." "Ava," I said quietly. "Sorry. I'm just figuring things out." She nodded like she'd heard it all before. "You got a place to stay?" I hesitated. She didn't wait for my answer. "Our espresso machine's been dying for weeks. If you know anything about fixing things, I can talk to the owner. Maybe we can work something out." I blinked. "You'd do that for me?" She shrugged. "Someone helped me once, too." I fixed their espresso machine in 20 minutes. That night, I slept in the back storage room of Rosa's cafe, on top of bags of coffee beans with the scent of cinnamon in the air. It wasn't much, but it was safe. It was warm. It was a start. For the next few weeks, the cafe became my world. By day, I cleaned tables, fixed leaky pipes, and made sure the espresso machine didn't die again. By night, after the last customer left, I pulled out my notebook and laptop and sat on the floor in the back storage room, surrounded by paper cups and burlap sacks of coffee beans. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. My time. My space. Rosa never pried, but sometimes she'd bring me leftover pastries or quietly refill my mug as I scribbled diagrams and formulas across the page. She didn't say much, but I could tell. She was rooting for me in her own way. I was working on something that had been living in my head for years, a new kind of energy storage system. Not just a better battery, something entirely different. Something that could change how the world handled renewable energy. Everyone was racing toward solar and wind, but no one had solved the biggest problem: storage. Batteries were still expensive, inefficient, and dirty. My idea was to use a new molecular structure, something I'd first modeled during my junior year of college. My professors had called it theoretical but interesting. My father had called it a science fair fantasy. But I believed in it, and I believed in me. I used the cafe's Wi-Fi to research patents and open-source designs. Every dollar I earned went to food and saving for a cheap shared room, and every free moment went to refining my design. One night, Rosa sat across from me on an overturned milk crate. She pointed at one of my sketches. "So, you're building a better battery." "Kind of," I said, smiling. "But not really. Traditional batteries waste a lot of energy when they store and release power. I'm working on a design that could make it almost 100% efficient." She whistled. "Sounds impossible." I grinned. "Yeah, that's what makes it fun." It started with a broken circuit board. One of the cafe regulars, a quiet guy in his early 30s named Benji, ran a small hardware startup a few blocks away. He came in for espresso every morning, barely said a word, always buried in his laptop. One afternoon, I overheard him cursing under his breath about a power management issue that was delaying a product launch. I don't know what made me speak up. Maybe I was tired of staying invisible. "I might be able to help," I said. He looked up, surprised. "You?" "I have an engineering degree, energy systems, mostly." I shrugged. Worth a shot. He hesitated but eventually agreed. That evening, I walked into his cluttered office and spent 2 hours diagnosing the issue. It wasn't even that complicated. Just a feedback loop error that no one had caught. I fixed it, tested it, and got it running. Benji stared at the screen like I'd just performed magic. "You just saved us weeks." The next day, he came back to the cafe. Not for coffee, but to talk. "What else are you working on?" he asked. I hesitated. No one had really asked me that in months. I debated brushing it off, but something in his tone told me I could trust him. So I showed him. My designs, my notebook, my theory about high-efficiency energy storage using a layered molecular framework. Benji didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss me. He just listened. For a long time. Finally, he said, "I know someone you need to meet." Benji introduced me to Dr. Eliza Brooks, a professor of molecular engineering at UC Berkeley. She had a sharp voice, sharper eyes, and a reputation for tearing apart PhD dissertations in under 5 minutes. She gave me 10. We met in her office late on a Wednesday. I showed her my sketches, formulas, research notes, everything I had. She didn't say much at first, just flipped through my notebook, occasionally raising an eyebrow or letting out a dry, unimpressed meh. Then she closed the book and looked me dead in the eye. "It's ambitious," she said, "maybe impossible, but you might be onto something." My hands were shaking. "You believe it could work?" She shrugged. "I believe it's worth testing." She arranged for me to access a lab at Berkeley after hours, nothing fancy, just enough equipment to run simulations and experiment with materials. I kept working at the cafe in the mornings, freelancing for startups during the day, and spending every evening in the lab. Some nights I didn't sleep at all. I lived off instant noodles and leftover pastries. My savings barely covered rent in the shared house I was staying in with 5 other people, all chasing their own Silicon Valley dreams. But I didn't care. I was chasing something bigger, something real. Then, one night, it happened. It was nearly 3 a.m. I was running one last test before calling it quits. I expected another failure, just like the 100 before it. But when the numbers came back on the screen, I froze. 98.7% energy retention. I ran it again. And again. Same result. I stared at the monitor, afraid to breathe. My heart was pounding, my hands were cold. It worked. It actually worked. Dr. Brooks verified the results herself. She ran the numbers, checked the materials, tested for inconsistencies, and when everything lined up, she sat back in her chair and just stared at the screen. "This isn't a breakthrough," she whispered. "This is a revolution." Word spread fast. Within a week, I was sitting in meetings with 3 different venture capital firms. David, the founder of the startup I'd helped through Benji, helped me prep for my pitch. Rosa brought me coffee and grilled me with questions like an investor. They both believed in me more than I believed in myself some days. The first 2 firms said the same thing: brilliant, but risky. The third meeting was different. The partner, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Harper Lane, leaned forward after my pitch and asked, "Why should I bet on you? You're 23, you've never run a company?" I looked her in the eye. "Because I've spent the last year proving impossible things are possible. Give me a chance, and I'll prove one more." She sat back, thought for a long moment, then said, "We'll invest $4,500,000 for 22%. I couldn't breathe. I nodded, holding back tears. I named my company Virion Energy, after a small green bird known for its quiet resilience. It felt right. I rented a tiny office, hired 3 brilliant engineers, and poured every dollar and every ounce of myself into building the first full-scale model of the storage system. It wasn't easy. We faced delays, design flaws, a near fire in the lab, and countless sleepless nights. But 2 years later, we did it. Our system reached 99.1% energy efficiency. The energy world exploded. Headlines called it the end of fossil fuel dominance. Companies lined up for partnerships. And me? The girl who left home with $100 and no plan. I had built something real. Something that mattered. 5 years. That's how long it had been since I walked away from the Morgan name. In that time, Virion Energy had grown into a $1,200,000,000 company. We were partnering with governments, reshaping energy grids, and powering cities in ways that once felt impossible. And Morgan and Partners, the empire my father had worshipped like a god, was crumbling. Their old-school financial model was no match for modern markets. They were bleeding clients, struggling with outdated tech, and now facing a hostile takeover. By us. Virion had quietly created a tech-focused investment arm under a different name. For the past year, we'd been buying shares, acquiring debt, waiting. And now, I was heading back to Boston. Not for revenge, not to gloat. To reclaim what was mine. I walked into the Morgan and Partners boardroom wearing a tailored suit, one I'd bought myself. The room hadn't changed, same mahogany table, same oil portraits of men who thought legacy was inherited, not earned. and at the far end of the table sat my father. He looked older, tired, smaller. He didn't recognize me at first. "I'm Ava Monroe," I said, "CEO of Virion Capital. We've called this meeting to finalize the acquisition terms." Silence. Then his eyes locked onto mine. His face turned pale. "Ava?" "Hello, father." Gasps. Whispers. A board member nearly dropped his pen. "This is a joke," he growled. "You think you can walk in here and—" "I already did," I said calmly. "We own 52% of Morgan and Partners, through debt, stock, and strategic buyouts." I opened the folder in front of me and slid it across the table. "Effective today, this company is ours. You are to step down immediately. The Morgan name will be retired." His hands trembled. "You would destroy your own family?" "No," I said quietly. "You did that when you decided I was worth only $100. He stared at me, speechless. I stood, straightened my blazer. "But don't worry, I'm not here to burn it all down, I'm here to build something better." I turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Oh, and about that $100 best investment you ever made?"